Before we go any further, there is something I need you to pay close attention to, because what is approaching this Friday may look like just another astrological transition on the surface. Yet beneath that simple description lies a turning point that many people will remember for years to come. The more I have reflected on this shift, the more convinced I have become that we are standing at the edge of one of the most meaningful, energetic chapters this decade has offered us. This is not the kind of change that arrives with fireworks. It arrives quietly. It arrives through the body. It arrives through exhaustion. And for many people, it has already begun. On Friday, June 19th, a celestial threshold will be crossed, one that has not been crossed in nearly half a century. What makes this moment so powerful is not merely the rarity of the event itself, but the area of life it is preparing to transform. The subjects touched by this transition reach directly into your relationship with security, value, physical well-being, and the invisible standards by which you measure your own worth. Perhaps recently you have noticed something difficult to explain. Maybe you have been waking up tired even after resting. Maybe tasks that once felt manageable now seem strangely overwhelming. Perhaps there is a growing sensation that you can no longer keep carrying the same pressures in the same way. It may feel as though your entire system is pushing back against a pace that once seemed normal. Many people are interpreting this as weakness, laziness, or lack of motivation. I do not believe that is what is happening at all. In fact, I believe this exhaustion contains a message. I believe your body is responding to an ending before your conscious mind fully understands that the ending has arrived. There is a reason this fatigue has become so widespread, and as we move deeper into this discussion, you will see how directly it connects to what unfolds on Friday. Most people will sense that something has shifted without understanding the deeper mechanics behind it. They will feel different. They will question why old motivations no longer work. They will wonder why the strategies that once pushed them forward suddenly feel empty. Yet once you understand the larger story unfolding in the sky, many experiences from the past several years may begin falling into place. You may look back and recognize patterns that previously seemed disconnected. You may finally understand why certain struggles have repeated themselves over and over again. For approximately the last 8 years, beginning in 2018, Chiron has been traveling through Aries. In astrology, Chiron is often associated with the archetype known as the wounded healer. It points toward a place inside the human experience where pain cannot simply be solved through determination or intelligence alone. It represents wounds that require awareness, acceptance, and transformation. These are the deeper layers of healing that force us to confront truths about ourselves that cannot be ignored forever. While Chiron has been moving through Aries, the focus of that healing process has centered around identity. Questions of selfhood have dominated the collective experience. Who am I beneath expectations? Do I deserve to take up space? Am I allowed to pursue my own path? Do I have the courage to define myself according to my own truth rather than someone else's demands? When you look back across these past 8 years, it becomes easier to see how frequently these themes have surfaced. Conflicts surrounding authority, personal freedom, power structures, recognition, and individual voice have appeared again and again. On both personal and collective levels, people have been wrestling with the right to exist authentically. Yet something remarkable is happening now. The chapter that has defined nearly a decade is reaching its conclusion. The realization struck me with surprising clarity. We are not merely adjusting this energy. We are leaving it behind. The cycle itself is ending. And I suspect many people have already begun feeling the evidence of that ending inside their own bodies. Aries is governed by Mars. It carries the language of action, survival, urgency, competition, and instinct. It operates through the nervous system's constant readiness to react. For nearly 8 continuous years, humanity has been immersed in that frequency. The collective atmosphere has been saturated with pressure, conflict, outrage, resistance, and the endless need to defend a position. Eventually, even the strongest system reaches a limit. Eventually, even the most determined person becomes exhausted. The sensation many people are experiencing now feels less like ordinary fatigue and more like a profound depletion. It is the feeling of having fought for too long. If you have been carrying that heaviness lately, if there is a tiredness that seems to reach all the way into your bones, consider the possibility that nothing is wrong with you. Consider the possibility that your system is communicating something important. Perhaps it is saying that the old way can no longer continue. Perhaps it is asking for a new relationship with life itself. Perhaps it is preparing for the exact shift that arrives when Chiron leaves Aries and enters Taurus. The timing is fascinating because the transition occurs precisely when so many people feel incapable of continuing the battle, as if the body itself has reached a point where it demands another approach. On Friday, June 19th, at 5:20 in the afternoon, Chiron officially departs Aries and enters Taurus. This is where the story changes dramatically. Taurus operates according to completely different priorities. It is not concerned with proving yourself. It is not focused on fighting for recognition. Instead, Taurus directs attention toward the tangible foundations of life. It governs the body, material resources, financial stability, physical comfort, safety, connection to the earth, and perhaps most importantly, the internal sense of value that exists beneath external achievement. As the wounded healer moves into this territory, a different layer of the human experience comes into focus. The wound being illuminated is no longer centered on identity. The spotlight shifts toward deserving. What do you believe you are worthy of receiving? What do you believe you must sacrifice in order to feel secure? What conditions have you attached to your own value? This may be the central theme of everything that unfolds during this next chapter. For countless people, the deepest obstacle to abundance is not external circumstance. It is the hidden belief that worth must be earned through struggle. It is the assumption that safety requires constant effort. It is the idea that rest must be justified, that comfort must be deserved, that love arrives only after proving yourself useful, that financial stability comes only after sufficient suffering. If these thoughts sound familiar, there is a reason. Such beliefs rarely emerge from nowhere. They are often inherited long before we are old enough to question them. Some people grew up surrounded by financial uncertainty, learning to associate survival with constant vigilance. Others were taught, directly or indirectly, that affection was connected to performance. Some inherited generational stories shaped by real hardship, where parents and grandparents endured scarcity so significant that fear became embedded within the family narrative itself. As this new chapter begins, those hidden beliefs are preparing to surface in ways that may be impossible to ignore, and that realization opens the door to the next part of this story. What makes this pattern so difficult to recognize is that it rarely announces itself loudly. It does not usually arrive as a dramatic fear that demands your attention. Instead, it lives in the background of everyday life, quietly shaping your decisions without asking for permission. Even when circumstances are stable, even when there is evidence that things are working out, there can still be an underlying tension that refuses to relax. A subtle expectation that something good will eventually be taken away. A lingering suspicion that security is temporary. A persistent feeling that you should keep proving yourself, because what you have today could disappear tomorrow. Many people have carried that internal narrative for so long that they mistake it for reality. They assume it is simply how life works. Yet that hidden voice is precisely what this next chapter is preparing to reveal. The very belief system that has been operating beneath the surface is about to become impossible to ignore. And while that realization may sound intimidating at first, it is important to see it for what it truly is. This is not the universe pointing out your flaws. This is not some cosmic judgment arriving to remind you of everything you have done wrong. The spotlight is appearing because healing cannot begin until the wound becomes visible. For years, these beliefs may have been directing your choices from behind the curtain. They may have influenced the relationships you accepted, the opportunities you rejected, the amount of rest you allowed yourself, and even the level of abundance you believed was available to you. What is changing now is not the existence of the wound. What is changing is your ability to finally see it clearly. And this is where the story becomes extraordinary. There is a detail connected to this transit that completely transformed the way I understood what is unfolding. The first time I truly connected the dots, I could not stop thinking about it. The significance felt much bigger than a routine astrological transition. When Chiron was originally discovered in 1977, its position in the sky was not random. At that moment, Chiron was located in Taurus, specifically at 3 degrees Taurus. Let that sink in for a moment. The shift arriving on Friday is not simply about moving from one zodiac sign into another. Something far deeper is taking place. Chiron is returning to the sign where humanity first encountered its presence. Because Chiron requires approximately 50 to 51 years to complete its journey around the Sun, this marks the first complete Chiron return since its discovery. We have never collectively experienced this exact cycle before. Not once. This is unprecedented within modern astrological awareness. When you pause and consider the symbolism, the implications become profound. Chiron represents the wounded healer. The understanding that our deepest pain often contains the seeds of our greatest wisdom. The insight that healing is not about erasing wounds, but transforming our relationship with them. That entire archetype entered human consciousness through Taurus energy. Taurus governs the physical world. It governs survival. It governs resources. It governs the body. It governs value. It governs the question of what something is truly worth. And now, after nearly half a century, Chiron is returning to the very territory where this lesson first emerged. There is something deeply symbolic about that return. It feels less like a new beginning and more like a long-awaited reunion, almost as though a conversation that began decades ago is finally reaching its next chapter. I cannot help but view this as a collective homecoming. It feels as if the universe is placing a mirror in front of humanity and asking a simple but powerful question. After 50 years of exploring the wounded healer, what have we actually learned? Have we truly understood the relationship between pain and wisdom? Have we learned how to value ourselves beyond productivity? Have we learned how to receive without believing we must first suffer? Have we learned how to create safety from within rather than endlessly searching for it outside ourselves? Those questions carry enormous weight right now. They are exciting because they suggest growth. They are unsettling because they demand honesty. What fascinates me even more is that this transition did not emerge out of nowhere. The astrological landscape throughout June has been building toward this moment with remarkable precision. Looking back across the month, it feels almost as though each event has been carefully preparing the emotional terrain for what is about to happen. Every alignment has contributed another layer to the larger story. Every movement has nudged the collective consciousness closer to this turning point. The process began on June 1st, when Mercury entered Cancer. Almost immediately, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations that previously felt detached or purely intellectual started moving into more personal territory. Memories surfaced. Family dynamics demanded attention. Emotional history became more relevant than external information. Instead of scattering attention in countless directions, the collective focus began turning inward. People became more protective of what mattered to them. The mind itself seemed less interested in noise and more interested in meaning. Then June 9th arrived and brought one of the most nurturing alignments of the month. Venus, the the planetary ruler of Taurus, formed an exact conjunction with Jupiter in Cancer. The energy of that aspect carried extraordinary emotional expansion. It created an atmosphere of possibility, generosity, and reassurance. For many people, there was a brief glimpse of what genuine abundance feels like. Not abundance as status, not abundance as achievement. Abundance as a feeling. A sense that life could support you. A sense that enough already existed. A sense that perhaps you did not need to remain in survival mode forever. For some individuals, that alignment felt like a warm wave washing through the heart. It offered a temporary opening where safety seemed attainable and where self-worth did not require justification. Yet there was another side to that experience. Moments of true abundance often reveal where abundance has been blocked. The instant you experience what genuine security feels like, you become aware of the beliefs that prevent you from sustaining it. The contrast becomes impossible to miss. And that is why some people experienced a noticeable emotional drop after the initial uplift. The high was not disappearing. It was illuminating resistance that had previously remained hidden. Then came June 13th, and this is where the emotional intensity accelerated dramatically. If there was one day this month that forced unresolved wounds into the open, it was this one. On June 13th, Venus, once again acting as ruler of Taurus and symbol of love, value, connection, and self-worth, formed a challenging square with Chiron positioned at the final degree of Aries. The 29th degree is known for carrying exceptional pressure. It represents urgency, completion, intensification. It often functions like a final examination before a cycle closes. The impact of that square was powerful. For many people, old emotional injuries suddenly resurfaced with surprising force. Feelings connected to rejection, exclusion, abandonment, or not being appreciated seemed to rise from nowhere. Yet they were not appearing without reason. The alignment was exposing exactly what needed to be seen. If there was a painful sensation of not being chosen, not being recognized, or somehow not measuring up, that experience reflected the collision between Venus and Chiron. The wound was being uncovered before the healing process could begin. What surfaced during those days often pointed directly toward deeply rooted beliefs. Beliefs that love must be earned. Beliefs that acceptance requires performance. Beliefs that vulnerability is dangerous. Beliefs that receiving support automatically creates risk. Many people discovered fears they did not realize they were carrying. Fears that if they relaxed, something valuable would disappear. Fears that if they stopped proving themselves, connection would vanish. Fears that safety and openness could never exist at the same time. For countless individuals, those days felt emotionally raw. The experience was uncomfortable because it touched places that had been protected for years. Yet that discomfort was not meaningless. It was revealing the exact material Chiron is preparing to work with as it enters Taurus. The wound had to be exposed before transformation could begin. And now that those hidden layers have surfaced, the stage is fully set for what comes next. If those recent days felt overwhelming, if emotions surfaced that seemed larger than the moment itself, I want you to understand something important before we go any further. What you experienced was not meaningless. It was not your imagination. It was not weakness. There was a reason those feelings rose to the surface when they did. In many ways, they were preparing you for the transition that is now arriving. They were revealing what needed attention before the next chapter could begin. And perhaps the most visible sign that this shift is already underway has been showing up somewhere many people least expect it, inside the body itself. Think back over the past several weeks. Have you noticed a level of exhaustion that feels different from ordinary tiredness? Not the kind that disappears after a good night's sleep, but something deeper, something heavier. A fatigue that seems to sit beneath the surface no matter how much rest you try to get. If so, there may be a larger story unfolding beneath that experience. Earlier, I mentioned that there was a specific reason so many people have been feeling drained. This is where that explanation begins to come into focus. For approximately 8 years, while Chiron traveled through Aries, the collective atmosphere carried a persistent sense of activation. Aries' energy pushes forward. It mobilizes, it reacts, it survives, it constantly asks for action, effort, and proof. Under that influence, many people unconsciously learn to operate as if every day required a battle. There was always another challenge to overcome, another obstacle to confront, another reason to remain alert. The problem is that the human system was never designed to remain in that state indefinitely. What begins as motivation eventually becomes strain. What begins as resilience eventually becomes depletion. The stress does not remain confined to thoughts and emotions. It moves into the body. It settles into the nervous system. It embeds itself within physical patterns. It shows up in clenched jaws, tight shoulders, shallow breathing, restless sleep, digestive issues, and an endless feeling of carrying invisible weight. The body remembers every moment of vigilance long after the mind has forgotten why it became vigilant in the first place. What I believe many people are experiencing right now is not simply exhaustion from daily life. It feels more like the beginning of a larger physiological release. As Chiron approaches Taurus, it is as though the collective nervous system is receiving permission to step away from a state of perpetual readiness. And something fascinating happens when a system that has been operating at maximum capacity for years finally begins to slow down. At first, it does not feel peaceful. It often feels like collapse. That distinction matters. Many people expect healing to arrive as immediate relief. They expect calm, clarity, and renewed energy. But the reality is often far messier. When the body has been fueled by stress hormones for years, the transition back toward regulation can feel disorienting. You may sleep longer than usual and still wake feeling depleted. You may feel physically heavy, as if your limbs are carrying far more weight than they should. You may experience unexplained aches, tension, sensitivity, or moments when your energy seems to disappear entirely without warning. If that sounds familiar, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not necessarily falling apart. You are not automatically failing. You are not proving that something is wrong with you. In many cases, what appears to be breakdown is actually the beginning of landing. It is the moment when a system that has remained on high alert for years finally recognizes that it no longer needs to maintain the same level of defense. The release can feel uncomfortable because the body is processing accumulated strain that was never fully discharged. For so long, many people have lived under the assumption that their value depended on constant performance. Produce more. Push harder. Keep going. Never stop. Never slow down. Never admit exhaustion. Yet the body has limits, and eventually those limits demand recognition. The exhaustion emerging now may be less about weakness and more about permission. Permission to stop carrying what no longer belongs to you. Permission to acknowledge fatigue instead of fighting it. Permission to recognize that rest is not something that must be earned through suffering. This is one of the most important invitations Chiron in Taurus appears to be presenting. It asks us to reconsider our relationship with the body itself, not as a machine designed for endless productivity, but as a living system deserving of care, a sacred system deserving of nourishment, a system that communicates wisdom through sensation, through fatigue, through discomfort, and through the simple request to slow down. And this is where the conversation expands beyond personal healing into something much larger. Because I believe this transit is going to challenge one of the most deeply embedded cultural narratives of modern life. For years, society has celebrated relentless productivity. The message has been repeated in countless forms. Work harder, sleep less, sacrifice more. Prove your commitment through exhaustion. Wear burnout like a badge of honor. The ability to push beyond your limits has often been treated as evidence of dedication and worth. But what if that entire framework is built upon an unresolved wound? What if the constant need to hustle is not evidence of health, but evidence of fear? What if overworking is not always ambition, but sometimes survival conditioning disguised as ambition? These are uncomfortable questions because many people have built their identity around being productive. The belief runs deep. If I achieve, then I matter. If I perform, then I deserve love. If I stay busy, then I am valuable. Yet Taurus measures life differently. Taurus is not impressed by how exhausted you are. Taurus does not reward self-abandonment. Taurus asks entirely different questions. Are you nourished? Do you feel secure within yourself? Can you inhabit your own body without constantly trying to escape it? Can you experience stillness without guilt? Can you receive support without believing you must immediately repay it? For many people, those questions will feel far more challenging than any career goal. Because what happens if your worth was never dependent on productivity in the first place? What happens if the very belief driving constant effort has also been blocking the abundance you seek? Imagine trying to catch water while keeping your fists permanently clenched. No matter how much flows toward you, nothing can stay. Sometimes endless striving creates the very resistance it hopes to overcome. Sometimes the pursuit becomes so consuming that there is no space left to receive. That realization may become one of the defining lessons of Chiron's journey through Taurus. It has the potential to reshape how people understand success, work, achievement, rest, and self-worth over the coming years. Yet there is another layer to this story that makes the transit even more significant. Chiron is not entering untouched territory. It is arriving in a landscape that has already been radically altered. For approximately the same 8-year period that Chiron spent in Aries, Uranus was moving through Taurus. And Uranus does not leave things unchanged. Wherever Uranus travels, it disrupts assumptions. It challenges stability. It exposes weaknesses within existing structures. Look at what unfolded throughout those years. The very foundations people depended upon were repeatedly shaken. Housing markets experienced dramatic instability. Inflation surged. Supply chains fractured. Speculative digital currencies rose and fell with astonishing volatility. Everyday expenses became increasingly difficult for many people to manage. Concepts once associated with security suddenly appeared far less reliable. Those developments reflected Uranus moving through Taurus. Again and again, the transit challenged the belief that external circumstances could guarantee permanent safety. It revealed how quickly supposedly stable structures could shift. Financial certainty, employment certainty, economic certainty, all of it proved more fragile than many people expected. Earlier this year, Uranus completed its journey through Taurus and moved into Gemini. But his departure did not erase what happened. The lessons remain. The disruptions remain. The emotional impact remains. And now Chiron steps into that same territory, not as a destroyer, not as a force of upheaval, but as a healer arriving after the storm. Uranus exposed the cracks. Uranus revealed where security had been built upon unstable foundations. Uranus showed where dependence on external certainty created vulnerability. Now, Chiron enters the space that was disrupted, carrying a very different purpose. The work ahead is not about tearing things down. It is about understanding what was lost, what was learned, and what must be rebuilt from a place far stronger than before. And that realization becomes the doorway into the next stage of this unfolding story. What makes this transition so meaningful is that Chiron is not arriving merely to point out where security has failed. Its purpose is far deeper than that. The years of instability, uncertainty, and disruption have already revealed how unreliable external structures can be. What Chiron brings now is an opportunity to construct something stronger in their place. Not a sense of safety dependent upon economic conditions, market fluctuations, employment status, or numbers sitting in a bank account. Instead, the invitation is to develop a form of stability that originates within, a relationship with yourself that remains intact regardless of changing circumstances, a sense of worth that does not rise and fall according to what you possess. This is the healing journey that begins as Chiron enters Taurus. It is not a process measured in days or weeks, it unfolds across years. Yet every long journey has a starting point, and that starting point arrives on Friday. There is also a group of people for whom this transit carries especially personal significance. If you were born between approximately 1976 and 1984, I want you to pay close attention, because what is beginning now may become one of the most important psychological and spiritual milestones of your life. Individuals born during those years have Chiron in Taurus in their natal charts. As Chiron re-enters Taurus, it initiates what astrologers call a Chiron return. Few experiences carry the same potential for deep transformation, because this is the moment when you come face to face with the very wound that has shaped much of your life's journey. Many of you are now somewhere between your early 40s and around 50 years old. Looking back, you may recognize a recurring theme running through adulthood. No matter how much progress was made, no matter how many achievements were accumulated, no matter how much financial effort was invested, there was often a lingering sense that true security remained just beyond reach. Perhaps you worked tirelessly to create stability, yet still felt uneasy. Perhaps abundance arrived, but anxiety remained. Perhaps there was always a quiet voice asking whether it would last. That persistent unease did not emerge from nowhere. For many members of this generation, childhood unfolded against a backdrop of genuine economic uncertainty. The inflation of the late 1970s and the recessions of the early 1980s created environments where financial stress became woven into daily life. Parents worried about resources. Families adapted to instability. Conversations about money carried tension. Even when children did not fully understand what was happening, they absorbed the emotional atmosphere around them. Long before they understood economics, they learned what financial fear felt like. That experience often became part of the nervous system itself. The Chiron return now asks a powerful question. After carrying this wound for decades, what wisdom has emerged from it? Has fear continued to dictate your relationship with security? Or have you begun transforming that fear into understanding? Have you learned that true worth cannot be measured solely through accumulation? Have you discovered that safety is not created exclusively through external resources? Have you recognized that abundance and self-value are deeply connected? The purpose of a Chiron return is never simply to revisit pain. Its deeper purpose is transformation. The archetype of the wounded healer reminds us that our greatest struggles often become our greatest gifts. The anxiety you have navigated, the concerns around money, the insecurities connected to the body, the constant pressure to prove your value through achievement. None of these experiences were meaningless. Over time, they can evolve into wisdom that benefits not only you, but everyone whose life you touch. This is why I believe this generation is being called into a particularly important role during the years ahead. The world does not merely need more experts, it needs examples. It needs people who embody what genuine stability looks like, people who can demonstrate groundedness rather than preach it, people who understand how to remain rooted when circumstances shift, people who no longer require constant external validation to know their value. In many ways, these individuals are being invited to become living teachers, not through perfection, but through embodiment, through showing others what it means to feel at home within their own bodies. through demonstrating that self-worth can exist independently of achievement, through proving that security is not simply something acquired, it is something cultivated from within. And that brings us to a practical question. What should you actually do during the week of June 19th? Because understanding the symbolism is valuable, but applying it matters just as much. As Chiron crosses into Taurus, old scarcity patterns may become more noticeable. Financial worries may arise unexpectedly. Physical tension may increase. You may notice sensations in the chest, the stomach, or throughout the body whenever thoughts about the future appear. Old fears may suddenly seem louder than they were a few weeks ago. The instinctive response for many people will be familiar. Work harder, plan more, tighten control, push forward, solve the discomfort through action. Yet that reaction belongs to the previous chapter. It belongs to the Aries chapter, and that chapter is ending. The invitation now is radically different. Instead of accelerating, slow down. Instead of moving further into the future, return to the present moment. Instead of remaining trapped inside mental projections, reconnect with physical reality. And I mean that quite literally. During this week, particularly on Friday, spend time in direct contact with the earth if possible. Place your bare feet on the ground. It may sound deceptively simple, yet Taurus speaks through physical experience. Taurus heals through the senses, through touch, through taste, through smell, through direct engagement with the material world. Work with your hands. Shape clay. Cook a meal from raw ingredients. Spend time among plants. Walk through a garden. Eat slowly. Allow yourself to experience nourishment without feeling obligated to earn it first. These actions may seem small, yet they speak the language Taurus understands best. There is also another practice I strongly encourage. Ask yourself a question with complete honesty. Where in my life do I struggle to receive? Perhaps the answer involves money. Perhaps it involves love. Perhaps it involves rest. Perhaps it involves recognition. Perhaps it involves pleasure itself. Notice where resistance appears. Notice where discomfort arises. Notice where you instinctively pull away from receiving support, appreciation, or abundance. Notice where you tell yourself that more work must be completed before you deserve what is already available. Bring those patterns into the light, because wounds gain power through invisibility. The moment you identify them, something begins to change. Many of the beliefs creating suffering today were inherited rather than chosen. They were learned through observation, conditioning, and repetition. If they were learned, they can also be transformed. That possibility sits at the heart of this entire transit. And there is one final piece of timing that makes this moment especially remarkable. Approximately 35 hours after Chiron enters Taurus, another important threshold arrives. On June 21st, the Sun enters Cancer, marking the summer solstice and the longest day of the year. Symbolically, this is a powerful turning point in its own right. Yet what captures my attention is what happens immediately afterward. The Sun forms a harmonious sextile with Chiron. The image that comes to mind is beautiful. It feels as though a gentle light is shining directly onto the wound that has just been revealed, not to expose it harshly, not to judge it, but to illuminate it with understanding, to create the conditions where honest healing becomes possible. The solstice has always represented transition, a crossing point between chapters. Combined with Chiron's movement into Taurus, it creates a message that feels impossible to ignore. The message is simple. Come back to yourself. Come back to your body. Come back to the place within you that exists beneath performance, achievement, productivity, and expectation. Remember that your value is not dependent upon what you produce. It is not determined by what you own. It is not measured by how useful you are to other people. Your worth exists before any accomplishment. It exists before any success. It exists before any external validation. And while many people struggle to believe that, the struggle itself reveals the wound now coming into focus. For years, countless systems have reinforced the idea that value must be earned. Chiron's journey through Taurus challenges that assumption directly. The healing begins when you recognize that the belief itself is what requires examination. This transit will remain active for approximately 7 years. During that time, Chiron will interact with Saturn, Pluto, and several of the most significant forces shaping the collective atmosphere. There will be periods of pressure. There will be economic adjustments. There will be important conversations about resources, sustainability, responsibility, and humanity's relationship with both the Earth and one another. The years ahead may not always feel comfortable, but they may prove to be profoundly meaningful. Because this is not merely a transit about money or security. It is a transit about redefining value itself. And I believe future generations may look back on this period as one of the most important healing chapters we have collectively experienced. As we reach the beginning of that journey this Friday, I would love to hear your perspective. Have you been noticing the exhaustion we discussed throughout this video? Did something significant arise around June 13th? Have old fears around scarcity, worth, or security been surfacing for you recently? Share your experience below, because there is tremendous power in recognizing that these journeys are not being navigated alone. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself during the days ahead. Treat your body with kindness. Give yourself permission to slow down when needed. And when the next chapter arrives, I look forward to continuing this conversation with you.